Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute's Next Round podcast. I'm Rowena Itchon, Senior Vice President, and with me, as always, is Tim Anaya, Senior Director of Communications. So before we jump in with this week's guest, we have a couple of announcements. I want to remind our listeners who live in Orange County and LA about our luncheon next week, Tuesday, August 2nd, with Manhattan Institute's Heather McDonald. It'll be in Newport Beach at the Pacific Club. She and PRI fellow Steve Smith will talk about rising crime and homelessness in the state, and we think it'll be a great discussion. Second announcement is that individual tickets are now on sale for our Northern California Gala on September 28th. And notice how I didn't say San Francisco Gala, because this time it's going to be in the Valley at the Four Seasons. Our keynote speaker is Peter Thiel, entrepreneur and philanthropist. And our Freedom Prize winner is Professor Chiron Skinner for her work in advancing freedom around the world. Many of our listeners know that Professor Skinner is a foreign policy expert. She served several administrations and edited several wonderful books on Ronald Reagan. So I hope our listeners can come out for that. And the details are on our website at pacificresearch.org. So our topic today, we've got two veteran guests with us, Wayne Winegarden, Senior Fellow in Business and Economics, and Kerry Jackson, PRI Fellow who works on California reform. We're going to talk about their new study analyzing Governor Newsom's Project Homekey, which aimed to reduce homelessness in the state. So I'll start off with the first question. So how about giving some background on Project Homekey? It evolved from the original Project Roomkey, which started during COVID and was intended to provide shelter for the homeless to protect them from COVID.
Well, I want to start with this one since it's an easy one, and maybe Wayne will feel compelled to answer the harder ones later on. So I'll start by saying Roomkey, as you said, was a COVID pandemic response. April 2020, the state said, well, we're going to provide, in their words, non-congregate shelter options for the homeless, because they wanted to, as part of holding down or flattening the curve of infection. So essentially, they put people in motel rooms, hotel rooms, and there are also trailers or mobile homes that they were housing people in at that time. And it was not looked at as permanent housing. It was just going to be, temporary to get through the pandemic. But soon thereafter, they decided, well, we're going to do Project Homekey. And that involves taking public money and buying hotel and motel rooms. And again, I believe they're also have been buying or plan to buy trailers, mobile homes, buying them, renovating them, and then turning them into permanent housing for the homeless.
And I think one thing to emphasize, which is, Project Roomkey, the idea was we wanted to get temporary housing. We had the COVID-19 pandemic. People, the homeless were particularly vulnerable. So it was this idea of just getting them temporarily into some sort of shelter. And so Homekey kind of took that and kind of expanded to, hey, we can try to make this permanent. And I think that, we talk about the differentiation or the evolution. That was a big evolution where at first it was just a temporary concept, and Homekey, I guess as all government programs do, eventually get enshrined into permanency or semi-permanency. And that was like that evolution between Roomkey to Homekey.
I think it's probably fair to say that I think some of Roomkey was probably motivated or prompted by the idea of getting people out of shelters where there's no separation between beds. As I said, non-congregate shelter is what they were looking at. So keeping people separated, keeping people from infecting each other, I think was probably well-intentioned and may have had some impact of at least slowing the spread among the homeless.
So Governor Newsom, in his State of the State address this year, of course, is taking credit for things, and he declared that Project Homekey was, quote, the fastest, largest, most cost-effective addition of permanent housing in California history. Well, when we read your new paper, you both paint a quite different picture of the success of Project Homekey. So what does your analysis tell us? Is Project Homekey getting the job done? Is Governor Newsom exaggerating here?
I'll jump in here, and I'll start by paraphrasing President Reagan when, is the homelessness crisis better this year than it was last year? And I think phrasing it that way becomes very clear that Homekey, by definition, hasn't been successful because the problem has gotten worse. Right? We continue to see homelessness counts continue to increase, yet the costs that we're paying for these programs continues to go up. And only in government do you see that we're going to spend more money money and consider the expenditures the success rather than actually achieving the ultimate goal. In this case, in California, we have a unique issue where not only do we have the largest homelessness population in the country, but this is the unique part, the share of the unsheltered part of that is actually the majority of it, whereas in most places, the unsheltered are a small minority. That's why we actually see the homelessness problem out on the streets. We see the tent cities, we see the feces and the drug needles, because so much of the problem is unsheltered. And that's continuing to fester despite the growth of the expenditures on Homekey. And what you see is that people are cycling through, but we're not actually permanently addressing the problem of homelessness. So no, it's not getting the job done. And so many of the governor's statements and so much of his figures are just pure exaggeration.
Well, I've been publicly and privately critical of the governor, but I will in his sort of a semi-defense. Yeah, he was exaggerating, but politicians do that. And sometimes they exaggerate in the sense of, well, they hope that what they're saying is going to come true in the future. They have some confidence, and they want the people who are listening to what they're saying to have some confidence of what they're saying is going to happen in the future. But he did get called on this in the State of the State address by Cal Matters, and essentially said it was a fact check. And they said, what he's talking about here, one of the statements is we've moved a record 58,000 people off the streets since the beginning of the pandemic. And they said, not really. They talked about his signature Project Homekey. At that point, only had about 8,000 through the program, and it did turn out. Essentially, I think he was trying to inspire confidence. But yeah, the facts don't match the rhetoric.
So recently, several counties around the state have been reporting point-in-time counts of their local homeless population. Now, point-in-time is a type of survey that's carried out in a single day, in this case for the homeless, a single night. Some of the numbers have been eye-popping, frankly. What's the data telling us? Can we infer from these numbers whether Project Homekey is a success or a failure? And how do you answer the potential criticism that we can't really draw too much of a conclusion given only a few years of data?
Well, I'll touch on a couple of those, maybe not getting into so much detail, leave a little meat on the bone for Wayne. But Sacramento comes to mind right away. We have seen a huge, and this is really, as we were getting ready to go to press with this report, we found that Sacramento's homeless has just skyrocketed, even past that in San Francisco, which is known for its homelessness problem. So, 2 years into Homekey, and now we have Sacramento putting up some incredible numbers. I'm looking now. Homeless population increased by 2/3 from 2019 to 2022, went from 5,500 to almost 9,300. So yeah, that's when you say eye-popping, that one will get in your eyes. And to try to address your final question there, what can we do? If they say, well, it's only a couple of years of data, we really haven't had a fair chance. But they have. And we're going to get into this later, but it's a housing first program, and housing first programs have not done the job. They just don't. They put people into housing, and that's all. They never address the root problem. I don't want to get too far into that again because we're going to touch on that later, I would think. But in government programs of just essentially throwing money or just another government program, redistribution of wealth, we've shown, and the numbers bear it out, that this is not what is going to help deal with homelessness.
All I would add to that is in the point-in-time counts for 2022, you had 8 of the 10 counties or cities with the largest homelessness population is continuing to see that population grow. And what we continue to see throughout the entire kind of program is that the number of homeless keep rising. And so when we talk about success of the program, if we're spending more money but seeing more people that are homeless in the state, it's very hard not to call that a failure. And in terms of, only a few years of data, I think, how long do you need for something to be successful? I mean, do we need a decade, 2 decades? How long do we need to live with the issue before this program is actually going to address it? And if it takes that long of a time, perhaps that's not the right way to go about addressing it. So those who would criticize say, well, we need more time. I think the fact that you're saying you need more time is demonstrative of the program just not working.
So as Kerry just mentioned, Project Homekey is based on the very controversial housing first philosophy that really dominates the thinking in government anti-homeless programs. So explain to our listeners what housing first is and why, in your view, it's not effective in helping to turn around the lives of those who are homeless.
I think I touched on this a second ago too, but it's something that this is an observation, and it's not particularly unique, but housing first is essentially housing and nothing else. They never treat the problems if you just put someone into housing. It's another way of institutionalizing and not really caring about the institutional life. These people are generally on the streets, as we have our book about homelessness a few years ago, because of the perilous trifecta. They're addicted to some sort of substance, maybe multiple substances. They have mental illnesses, and of course, they're on the street. They're homeless. So just putting somebody in permanent shelter, permanent housing, only addresses one of those. And if you're only going to address one of those, the other two are going to continue. And I don't see how that makes an improvement. We also found out that when you have a housing first program, you tend to draw people into it. Hey, free housing, let's go. And that doesn't alleviate the problem. That seems to create it and make it even worse.
Yeah, that whole idea of housing first is that the best place to help someone is from a stable home. And to a sense, there's obviously a logic to that. But the problem is when you're struggling with addiction, struggling with mental illness, a stable home is a bit of a bridge too far. It's something that what's really needed is effective treatment. And the problem is that you can't prioritize everything. And so when you're focusing and spending way too much money on creating the housing, when you're focusing on that aspect, there's just not enough resources and enough prioritization to actually hit the programs that are actually going to treat the root causes. So if you're not prioritizing the root causes, then that's not going to be where the focus is. It's not going to be what the metrics of success are going to be. And you can actually see that when you see the governor talking about the whole Project Homekey. He talks about how many people are being sheltered, how many people are getting into the housing, into the motel rooms, not necessarily how many people are being treated. How are we getting people to address the mental illness, to address the addiction? And so it's very much of a prioritization, and the idea you cannot prioritize everything. And so when you prioritize housing, what falls to the wayside are actually the root causes of the problem. And that's why you end up seeing the program being less successful than it should be.
So let's explore some of your findings about how Project Homekey is doing in communities across the state. So let's start off with Los Angeles. You argue that Project Homekey is failing LA. How so?
Well, San Francisco has a reputation of essentially a capital or center of homelessness. And now we talk about Sacramento, it's surpassing San Francisco. But the real capital is LA. It's a bigger city. It's a bigger county of roughly 10 million, between 9 and 10 million, a quarter population of the state of California. So that's where the bulk of the homeless are. It's very expensive to live here, and it's very expensive to put the homeless into housing. And so that's been a problem throughout. And also look at some numbers. They were supposedly the goal, one of the initial goals of these projects was to put 15,000 rooms in LA County alone. But roughly a year into the program, in June of last year, there were less than 1,800 rooms that were occupied, not getting the job done. So, and again, we say they're very expensive. And in some cases, we look at some of the numbers, it's $275 each per room at one hotel that Project Homekey was being renovated, turned into housing. Another was $330,000 for each room. This is a pile of money. I mean, we're talking in some cases more than 3 times what it would cost for a room in what they're called SRO hotels, single room occupancy hotels. And there is an AIDS foundation that has housed people in these SRO hotels, house AIDS victims, and their per room cost is a little over $100,000. So we're looking at comparing that to $275,000, $330,000. I think this adds up to, at least if not yet a failure, a failing.
And to add to the failing, when you talk about people who are going through the program, because you could say, okay, we're spending a lot of money per person, but at least we're getting people into a sustainable position where they're in permanent housing, able to hold down a job and live their lives off of the streets. But we're not even seeing that for the money. So when you're talking about, people going through the program, only a small minority end up being in permanent housing. Most of the others either go back into some sort of interim housing or shelter program, Some are on the streets. Others are passing away from drug overdoses in the actual Home First facilities. So not only is this exceptionally expensive, but we're not actually achieving the goal when we spend that money of getting people off of the streets into a sustainable kind of permanent housing where someone's homelessness issues and the factors that have driven them to homelessness have been addressed. The other thing when you talk about building the housing and the costs, you're actually spending more to build as many of these units than the actual average price of a home in LA. And that gets into all of the different regulations that drive up costs, all of the NIMBY issues in terms of some of these places. So even though, so on top of this, just ineffectiveness, and just goes right into what Kerry was just saying, the costs per are just excessive. And that cost itself means that the program is not sustainable because we can't be spending hundreds of millions of dollars every year on the same programs, doing the same thing over and over and over again without achieving the goals that it's designed to achieve.
So before California enacted Project Homekey on a statewide level, Los Angeles embraced a similar effort with the passage of Proposition HHH. But recent headlines have shown that the City of Angels is spending a ridiculous amount of Prop HHH money per unit to build homeless housing. So what's the story here?
Known to some people's proposition, ha, 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 because it hasn't in 5 years, 6 years almost, has not lived up to its promises. And, it was a 2016 ballot initiative. 77% of the county voters said, the city voters said, yes, we're going to do this. We're going to follow this measure HHH. And the issue is to issue $1.2 billion in bonds. Fund housing for the homeless, people at risk of becoming homeless, and so forth. Last year, late in the year, December 2021, the Los Angeles comptroller had an audit. Maybe a review is a better term for it, but I'll quote directly from that audit. Over the past year, unit costs of the primary pipeline continue to climb to staggering heights. For projects in construction, the average per unit cost increased from $531,000 in 2020 to $596,000 in 2021. 14% of the units in construction exceeded $700,000 per unit, and one project in pre-development is estimated to cost nearly $837,000 per unit. He said there have been so many problems. He said there has been some successes, but he said problems have overshadowed any progress on HHH. So, again, they voted on that in 2016. We're not quite 6 years from that date, and HHH still hasn't delivered. So, again, another example of why Homekey, it just has they're not exactly the same program, but they're close enough to where, you can look at it and go, yeah, HHH isn't working, then why should Homekey work?
It is really the same story. You almost feel like you're getting repetitive here, but HHH was passed. Homeless population's up 45%. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on HHH, closing in on that $1 billion mark. We have developed less than half of the units we promised. And again, when you're spending this much money on housing that's, you're overpaying for, you don't have the resources for treatment. You don't have the resources to clean up the streets. You don't have the resources to do all the other things that we need to do. So again, it's wasteful expenditures that aren't helping people. It isn't. The idea is that we're helping homeless kind of get off the streets, but that's rhetoric. That's not actually what's happening. So it's sold under this idea that we're going to help people. In reality, what we're doing is we're spending a tremendous amount of money helping very few, and the homeless population problem continues to grow. So it's, again, that housing first approach. It's the same thing in HHS as Homekey, as in Roomkey. And it's another example of why we need to rethink the idea of housing first as a primary way of addressing the homelessness crisis in California.
So let's turn to San Francisco, which always generates national headlines when it comes to homeless. What does your research show on how Project Homekey is either helping or hurting the problem in San Francisco?
History of homelessness or the government, public officials taking care of the homeless in San Francisco is nothing. It's not a sterling success by any means. In fact, it's something of a disaster. San Francisco Chronicle did a long story. Give them credit for this investigation, this investigative report, and found out that the housing that they were sheltering homeless in. Again, this is previous and not necessarily connected to Homekey, but it shows how Homekey is not going to be able to work because rodent-infested, insect-infested hotels where people were, you end up putting a lot of people who are addicted, who have mental illness problems together in tight spaces under bad conditions. You're going to end up having some crime, and they've had some serious crimes in these problems or in this housing situation. And the problem is, one of the major problems is a little oversight in this situation in San Francisco. And they're spending incredible amounts of money. It's almost like putting people in housing and just leaving them to their own devices and say, well, whatever happens, happens. And I think
what you've ended up with is, I'm jumping in over top of you here, but what you've ended up with is lots of violence in these units. You actually have the staff that have been threatened far too often. You have I think 14% of the people have been confirmed overdose deaths. And so we have people who are obviously continuing to use and abuse substances in the actual Homekey facilities. So you have facilities that are rat infested, or there was one example that Kerry did great reporting on this, where a person was sleeping in a tent inside of the room because there were so many rodents in the room with it. That was the only way to feel safe. So it's rodent infested. There are drug overdose deaths. There's violence. There's violence towards the people who are working. They're trying to help the case managers. So it's again, and a very expensive failure is the only way to kind of position it. And again, the problem of homeless on the streets continues to grow. And I think that if there's one theme when we're talking about Homekey to always keep in mind is that one concept: spending billions of dollars, and each year the point in time count of unsheltered homeless in the state grows.
I think we're all baseball fans here, and we can look at the analytics they have out there, and they use previous performances or a player's record and a team's record, but mostly at the player level, which is very good at predicting the future. And San Francisco's record, its history of dealing with the homeless, is poor. So all the tens of millions, and I don't know what it's added up to, how many grants San Francisco has gotten so far from in regards to Homekey. But people can, if they want to, they can certainly go to our paper and look at the numbers there. But there's a lot of money they're putting into this, and again, the record doesn't show that the city is going to spend the money properly and take care of the homeless as it should.
So communities across the Bay Area are also embracing Project Homekey in their efforts to reduce homelessness. What did you learn about what's going on with homelessness in the Bay Area outside of San Francisco?
To me, outside the Bay Area, it could really be summed up with one word, which is NIMBY. That another obstacle, which we haven't talked about, but you really saw outside the rest of the Bay Area, is the idea that when you're building these things, you need to do it someplace, and somebody lives there. And people don't want these types of facilities in their backyard. So you have this NIMBY problem, and you really have seen that in the outside the Bay Area, where the local population obstructs it because they don't want these facilities in their backyard. And so that it demonstrates another obstacle to this Project Homekey, which is not in my backyard.
Yeah, they're just having trouble acquiring and converting property in Bay Area outside of San Francisco. They have a hard time getting projects approved. And of course, as Wayne has mentioned, the California Environmental Quality Act, which is used quite often by NIMBYs. They're going to sue over some perceived environmental problem, and when they're opposition to whatever's being built, in this case, permanent housing, or even temporary housing for the homeless, that's what they don't want. But they'll try to base and they'll often are successful to base their opposition on some sort of environmental problem that they have. That's exaggerated in so many cases.
So really the conclusion of your paper is that the state is doing a terrible job of spending taxpayer dollars on homeless programs like Project Homekey. So what can we do differently? If you were advising Governor Newsom or a local leader across the state, what would you recommend that they do to spend taxpayer dollars more efficiently and effectively to address the homeless problem?
I'll be real quick and short of this and let Wayne finish with a flourish. I would suggest, or if I were the governor, or I would suggest to the current governor, look around, see what other states and cities have done to be successful, even in the small areas. Even it doesn't have to be a comprehensive success. It can even be something small. But look and see what others have done to deal with their homelessness problem. Now, unfortunately, we have a governor who seems to think everything California does is perfect and nothing anybody does anywhere else is of any. It must be crazy. I mean, given his ads that he's been running and comments he's been making. But at some point, you might want to say, we don't know everything, and maybe there's some programs out there, private sector programs, pilot programs, experiments that are actually working and that we can apply them here.
I would suggest that the focus of the programs need to understand, there's different causes of homelessness, and we need programs that explicitly address those issues. We spent a lot of time today talking about people suffering from addiction and suffering from mental illness. And so what we need are programs, institutions, because you can do it much more cost effectively, where treatment is the first the first thing we're talking about. So treatment first, housing earned, those types of concepts. And so instead of spending the money on building homes for $800,000 a piece in Los Angeles, we should be putting that money into treatment. Now, obviously, to facilitate treatment, we need to get people off of the street, which means we need to be enforcing, camping laws. We need to use the court system as an opportunity in terms of a negative interaction where someone who is homeless, suffering from addiction or mental illness, commits a crime, as opposed to ignoring it, as opposed to defining down deviancy by saying, okay, you can steal up to $950, we won't prosecute you. We want to be able to prosecute people, and instead of putting them in jail and continuing the cycle, sentence them to treatment. And if you can fulfill treatment from this homeless court, then we'll expunge your record, because the idea is, how do we get somebody back to where they have control over their addiction? We're able to sustainably regain housing, right, and regain a job and participate in life that way and get him off of the streets. So we need to focus on those types of problems as opposed to focusing on just the housing. The same type of thing, that was a negative interaction, create homeless day rooms where we provide services to people, bring them in and help people connect them to those, those services. And to the extent that we can use private sector institutions that have shown themselves to be able to serve this population more cost effectively, right? Then that's, again, using taxpayer resources as efficiently as possible to help provide these people with the services that they need to regain control over their lives. Using police as ways to connect people, because often the police are aware with the homeless necessarily, but aren't necessarily empowered with the information to get those people connected to the resources that will help them, connecting homelessness with their family, all of these types of programs. From an economic side, we need to address the issues that are driving up costs, because there are some homeless who are homeless for economic reasons. And once you've helped somebody, we need actual affordable housing in California, which isn't a government program. Affordable housing comes from reforming zoning laws, from reforming CEQA, and lowering other types of regulations, multifamily housing, to improve the amount, to increase supply of housing. And that will then lead to better affordability. And that will actually help provide the economic support to this whole program of, comprehensive program of moving people off of the streets. But it needs to be that comprehensive approach, because it is a comprehensive problem. It's a problem of mental illness. It's a problem of addiction. It's an economic problem. And we need to address it as such. Otherwise, we're not going to actually sustainably alleviate the problem, which is beginning to seriously impact not just the homeless, and it is, but also the broader community as well.
Thank you so much, Wayne and Kerry. This is a great study, and I believe it's the first study out there analyzing the governor's Project Homekey. So we hope you take a look at it. It's on our website at pacificresearch.org. Thanks so much. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.